I tell you about CAPS and about the scholarship report, let me just thank Withers very much for making this space available. We have been working closely with them from the beginning. In fact, Michelle Chow of Withers wrote our Articles of Incorporation. So it goes back to day one. So thank you, Deirdre, very much. We're delighted that we have Allan Goodman with us today from the Institute of International Education, based in New York but working globally and with an office here. IIE is really the premier nonprofit organization in the world of education and scholarships, and I'm sure that what he has to share with us today will be really interesting, relevant, and insightful. We want to thank Merle Henrik and his team that are here, Catherine Diol. Merle lives in Hong Kong and has created one of the most interesting scholarship programs anywhere. And there's a blurb, not a blurb, but some information about it in our report, and we reference it as really an excellent case study of a good scholarship program. I want to thank colleagues from Hong Kong U that are here that have been helpful in this study. And I really want to thank our research team from CAPS. Our Director of Research, Mehvesh Mumtaz Ahmed, is going to really be the one who tells you all about the report, but I also really want to thank Hee-Soo Jung, who's a research associate, Vincent Chang, who's back there, Vincent, Mohana, who's from our intern, who's taking pictures, Maureen Tai, who is our Director of Administration, who is here today, with us today. CAPS is a research and advisory nonprofit based in Hong Kong, but we work across Asia in 16 economies. So really that's 14 countries, Taiwan and Hong Kong. We do policy research and we do applied research. We also have a knowledge portal that we're building up so that it will become, we want to put other people's work up on our knowledge portal that's relevant for Asia. So if you have articles or studies or reports that you want to share with us, please let us know, send it to us and we'll put it up. We also will send you our newsletter if you put your business card in the bowl in the front. We are relatively new, but getting some traction with our work, and it's kind of a very exciting time for CAPS and our team. The scholarship report is our first applied report. We came out with our policy report, the Doing Good Index, several months ago, and now we have our scholarship report. And why did we pick scholarships? Well, because when I was doing, in my work, first with the Asia Business Council, another organization that I helped to create, and in doing the work leading up to the creation of CAPS, every high net worth and ultra high net worth philanthropist that I met in Asia, every single one, supported scholarships to one extent or another. Some people just a couple, some people thousands. Some people just gave the money to universities, some people did it directly. But everyone gives scholarships. And it became very easy for me because whenever I was meeting a philanthropist, I said, well, we're doing a study on scholarships. And the person would always say, I give scholarships. And I would say, I know. In fact, most people do. And it's really widely supported. Why? Why are scholarships so popular in Asia? I think it's because they marry two really important values that are fundamental to the way Asian philanthropists think about doing good in the world. One is education. I think everybody in this room must know that education is by far the #1 destination of all philanthropy in this region. So education, absolutely the most important. And two, scholarships affect people directly. They are about relationships, really, creating relationships with young people who are up and coming, who really can make a difference. So when you combine the appreciation of direct communication and relationships and education, you've got essentially a golden formula in this part of the world, and helps to explain why scholarships are so important. Sometimes, though, when I talk to people who are not the philanthropists themselves, but are consultants or are in the field, and they say scholarships, people have been giving scholarships 10, 20, 30 years. What's innovative about scholarships? And we thought a lot about it, you know. In today's age where everybody's looking for innovation and looking for, you know, scaling up and looking for creative destruction, scholarships may not fit. But what we found is scholarships are highly impactful. They change people's lives. So when someone says, well, I've been giving scholarships for 30 years, maybe I should do something else, we say, no, don't. Please keep doing this. This is really important. And as Mevich is going to explain in our study, we show how impactful scholarships are. And so we think that the turnout today shows that people are interested in this topic, that they are important, that even though scholarships have been a tool that have been used by philanthropists and governments for decades, they should continue to be used because they really make a difference. I just want to say that at the end of this report, and for all of our future applied research studies, there's a toolkit. Our goal with our research is to be read and used. We never want to do something that goes up on a shelf and is not utilized. So at the end of all of our applied work, there will be a toolkit that says, if you do this, here's how to do it better. Here's what we learned. Here are best practices. And Mevich will walk you through some of those. But that's going to be essentially one of the hallmarks of our applied work going forward. So I think that that's all that I have. I'm just going to go ahead and introduce our special guest, which is Allan Goodman. Allan is the president of the Institute for International Education, as I said. IIE, I think I got my PhD in education, unfortunately, 25 years ago, and IIE had already been around for a long time. What year was it established?
1919.
1919. Okay, one of the few things that really is before my time, thankfully. But it is really the premier organization, center of excellence in this line of work, and so it is a delight to be able to welcome him to this podium and to Hong Kong to share his views.
Well, congratulations, Ruth and Mevich, on your report. I've read it. It's really practical. It really hits 3 or 4 themes that emerging philanthropists can use to shape their vision and their programs. So I'm delighted. Following me, there'll be an explanation of the report, and I know there's lots of copies outside. It's the kind of thing that you won't put on your bookshelf because you'll want to use it quite actively. So you're so right. Thank you for also having our team from the Hong Kong office here, Wallace and Maria, and Paul Turner, our China director, who splits his time between Hong Kong and Beijing. And IIE's team in both places, we hope, is a resource for people interested in philanthropy, and also great at finding people who can use the philanthropy in the form of scholarships. And earlier I saw Dara Paradiso. Is Dara here, the public affairs counselor at the U.S. consulate here in Hong Kong, who worked so tirelessly to promote programs like Fulbright and the closer relationships between the people of Hong Kong and the people of America. Those programs are needed more than ever. So Dara, great to see you, and thank you for your great work. I wanted to talk about building 3 critical bridges for the future through philanthropy. One is to the poor, one is to the displaced, and one is to the isolationist. But I wanted to begin with a Hong Kong story. Some years ago at the World Economic Forum at Davos, I had the privilege of sitting next to the chairman of your stock exchange. I had a little bit of a worry sitting next to him because I know nothing about finance. And as my family will tell you, any stock that I pick is guaranteed to go down. And I have a perfect record in doing that. And I wondered what for the next hour or so we would talk about. And he was very kind. I broke the ice right away and said, "What do you do and where do you work?" And I'm sure he was expecting me to say a bank, a company, a big business. And I said, "Well, I work at IIE." "Oh, I know IIE because in the 1960s or early 1970s, I went by the IIE office and a lady there found me a scholarship." And then he proceeded to tell me his story. Family came as refugees, settled here, extremely poor, no prospect of going to the local university, couldn't pass the exams, couldn't get in, weak in English. And we had an office, Wallace, Paul, and Maria at the time, I think composed entirely of volunteers. And they tended to be spouses of expats working here. And somehow they got together and agreed that what each of them would do is nag and badger and plead with their alma mater to create a scholarship for a student from Hong Kong to attend university. And lo and behold, one of our volunteers found a scholarship for later to be your chairman of the stock exchange to go to Bowling Green University. I actually have no idea where Bowling Green is. I've never been to Bowling Green. It's got a great reputation. He had never heard of it, but it opened the door for him. He went there 2 years, and a faculty member said, "You know, you have terrific potential. You could actually go to Harvard, and I can arrange that you will." And sort of the rest is history. Harvard finished his degree at Harvard, and went to the Harvard Business School, and came back here and became successful. I tell this story because it is really easy in the scholarship business to find people who are fluent in English, who come from privileged backgrounds, who have all the advantages, and who you know will do terrifically well at Harvard or Stanford. The problem is that that's not the group we need to build bridges to. And we impose a lot of limits on ourselves as philanthropists. For example, many programs say it's a scholarship for anybody who gets admitted to Harvard, or any of the schools on the top 25 or top 50 of the league tables. It's sometimes an efficient way for governments to ration scholarships, but it's a terrible way to find people who can really excel, who would not otherwise have the opportunity to do so. And that's what our little office, well, volunteers were doing. They were saying, "I'm not worried about the student whose parents could afford to send them to the international school, who then got them into Harvard, made a gift to Harvard. We want to find people in Hong Kong who would never have that chance." And for a decade, just a few years ago, we finished it. We did a major program for the Ford Foundation to find 5,000 people in 22 different countries to send them to higher education that would not have a chance otherwise because of their poverty, disability, wrong tribe, wrong religion, wrong ethnic group, wrong birthplace. 98% of the 5,000 people that went finished their degrees. Most with distinction, some with gold medals in mathematics. And what struck us about this was that we would not otherwise have searched for these people. because we would have searched for those who were fluent in English, those who had high scores, and Ford's whole idea was to reach people who wouldn't otherwise have this opportunity. And we're in the midst of doing a 10-year study now of what impact this had. Did they return home? Yes. Did they create social justice and community advancement organizations? Yes. They did all the things that are highlighted in this new report that you would want students to do that have impact. And we learned a lot about how to find people who are not privileged, not advanced, not able to get into these universities, but with a little bit of help and the subvention, managed to graduate at the top of their class. That's a Hong Kong story from our early founding. It's a Ford story from the past decade. And it seems to me the first and most important bridge philanthropists ought to go is to the poor. Because there are an awful lot more people who are poor that are an awful lot smarter than the few that are rich. And the world is not going to be saved by the few that are rich that get the chance to go to the Harvards or the Stanfords. They're going to be saved by people from communities that your philanthropy helps that would not otherwise have the chance, that actually we know can succeed at the Harvards and the Stanfords and the Bowling Greens and everything in between. So the first bridge I think that's important to build for the future is to the poor, and it's really easy to exclude them. You really have to work at finding them. You really have to work at your criteria. You have to work at the kind of preparation that you might need to give someone from that background. But the impact on our world for the future will be 10 times what it is than if you simply pick the usual suspects. The second bridge that's critical for philanthropists to build is to refugee and displaced populations. There are 68.5 million refugees and displaced people today in the world. What's surprising about that number is not its size, but the fact that many of them are students. In Syria alone, 25% of the university population is disconnected from universities. They started universities, they can't finish because of the war. And if we don't take care of the lost generation, if we don't find a way to connect people to higher education, and the world's refugee population just continues to swell, and the average length of time people spend in a refugee camp is not a few years as it was after World War II, but 17 or 18 or 19 years. And if they finish secondary school, they can't go to the university in the country where the refugee camp is because there's not enough seats in the national universities. If they become the lost generation, our world will not be safer. It will become recruits for the armies of the night. So if you want to make the world a less dangerous place as a philanthropist, if you want to deny ISIS new recruits and other forms of extremism, new terrorists, maybe the best investment you can make is to the investment nobody's making today in the displaced and in the refugees. Third bridge that I think is really important to build is to the isolationists. Now, when I started as president of IIE, there was a forecast by the British Council that by the end of this decade, about 7.5 million people would be studying in other countries. This was a measure of global mobility. We're not even at 5 million as we speak, and the revised forecast suggested by the end of this decade, there might be only 4 million people out of 160 million students that study abroad in another country. If we don't keep our doors open, we're not going to keep our minds open. If we don't try to encourage international as part of everybody's education, we are going to end up with a decade of isolationists. We already have a decade of nationalism in the countries. And the quickest way to make nationalism an anchor of government policy is to make sure that people don't study in each other's countries, that we don't encourage this. And it may well take philanthropists to go against the current trend to stay at home, whether you're comfortable at home, whether the national policy is to stay at home, whether it's a political preference to stay at home. If we don't try to give as many opportunities as possible so that there is a genuine circulation of academic talent, we will end up with a world of closed minds as well as closed borders. And in these three areas, I think philanthropy, innovative, impact-oriented philanthropy, can make the world we share a less dangerous place. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Goodman, for that very inspiring speech in which you both shared some very inspirational stories, but also issued a sobering call to action. And I think what really resonated with me was this image of building bridges. And we at CAPS have found through our research that scholarships are about building bridges to different communities, but also about enabling future bridge builders, because we have found that these scholars go out and they build even more bridges. So the ripple effect of these scholarships goes far beyond just the one student who is getting a scholarship and going to university. So let me start by expanding a little bit on what Ruth spoke about earlier, which is why did we choose this topic? We chose scholarships because we do know that education is the largest recipient of philanthropic funding in Asia. In fact, about a third of global philanthropic funds for education flow to Asia. Some of the largest foundations in the world that are working on education and in education are Asian. And in fact, in a few countries such as China and the Philippines, we have found that up to half the foundations nationally actually support education and scholarships in one way or another. So scholarships are important, they are prevalent, a lot of resources flow to them, that's one. The second reason is that there is very little scholarship on scholarships. So there isn't much in academic research, there is not that much in development research through other sources. In fact, the biggest sources of scholarship on scholarships that we found were actually IIE. So it's an area that is important, consequential, but really vastly understudied. And finally, we found that although we haven't quite reached the point of a crisis of confidence in scholarships, they are being viewed as a traditional tool of philanthropy in a world that constantly wants to upend tradition and do things in a new and different way. So what we wanted to do was, we wanted to really delve into and create insights for what is the impact of scholarships. And we wanted to add data and evidence to support our insights, which is something we always try to do as a research organization. So there are two questions that we set out to answer. The first is, what is the impact of a scholarship? And I'm going to walk you through what we found. But the second one, again as Ruth mentioned, is how can scholarship programs be made more effective? Whenever people talk about more effective, I think donors' ears start to burn a little, because more effective usually means more expensive. What we find though is that with relatively minor tweaks, just making a few links here and there, that does not require much extra resources, scholarship programs can really can really increase and amplify their impact in a way perhaps that donors and funders are not thinking about. We want to help them get there. So how did we go about this? We looked at 3 countries, China, India, and the Philippines, and I'll explain why we picked these 3 and the programs that we chose there. we wanted to gather primary data by surveying scholars. We surveyed 800 scholars, including current recipients and alumni across these 3 countries. The 3 programs we looked at span a wide range of the nature of scholarship programs. There was a program that sent students abroad. One of the programs sent underprivileged students to university within the same country, and one of them was a corporate-sponsored scholarship program. What we wanted to do is choose programs and countries that can give us data that is then generalizable, and we try to cover sort of all aspects of the spectrum of scholarship programs that we could. And we are very grateful to the Virtuous Foundation in the Philippines, the J.N. Tata Endowment for the Higher Education of Indians in India, and the XHEF Compassion Education Foundation in China for allowing us to speak to their scholars and for helping us and facilitating us in gathering this data. And we have a board member of the XHEF Foundation here. Thank you so much for joining us. With these 3 programs, not only are we covering a different target student population, we also cover different types of funding. Some of them provide grants, others provide loans. Some are complete full scholarships that cover the costs of both tuition and expenses. Others are partial. And we found with this some common insights about the impact of scholarships that cut across the different kinds of funding, the different kinds of funders, and the different kinds of students that were benefiting from all these kinds of programs. We found that the impact of scholarships should really be thought about at 3 different levels. Not only is a scholarship impacting the recipient himself, it's also impacting the community that that recipient belongs to, as well as the country that that recipient will then be contributing to. In fact, we came up with an interesting figure, which is that one scholarship enhances 26 lives. That includes the scholarship recipient herself, it includes her family, it includes the students that she mentors throughout college. It includes the students that she leads when she steps up to take charge of student clubs and societies. And it includes the community members that benefit from the volunteering that scholarship recipients are likely to engage in. So a single scholarship has the capacity, on average, to enhance 26 lives. And the way we did our calculations, I can assure you, if anything, this is an underestimate. So let's talk about what the impact on the student is. The first one is that higher education equals higher pay. We know from research that the World Bank has done that every year spent in higher education yields about almost a 17% higher annual salary for individuals compared to those who do not attend university. So these are cold, hard numbers that really support the case for putting students through college. We also found that low-income students gain access to higher education. Again, no surprise there. But it's also not surprising when students from lower-income households view the costs that are associated with higher education as debt. So we were able to delve into the research around why higher costs of higher education keep lower-income students away from university if they could access loans, for example. It's because they don't like to take on debt. They are genuinely debt and risk averse because they don't feel they will be employable after university. So by need-based scholarship programs that allow lower income students to access education, we are removing this aversion to taking on the risk of debt and of higher education. Half of the scholars in the Philippines that we surveyed were the first in their families to go to college. We didn't only survey these scholars, we met them, we interviewed some of them, we heard their stories, we saw the passion, the commitment, the gratefulness that they feel for having this opportunity. We have a quote from one of our Filipino scholars who said, "My father is a tricycle driver and my mother is a laundry woman. When I received my university diploma, they were crying." It's stories like these that when aggregated across the many students, not only amplify the impact of scholarship programs, but that makes these students work hard to make sure that they are more impactful beyond just themselves. And I'll come to that in a minute. We also found at this level of impact that there is a virtuous cycle of recipients helping other recipients access higher education. So of the scholars in our survey and in our interviews who were involved in extracurricular activities, 2/3 of those in India and about 1/3 in the Philippines were involved in helping fellow students apply to university, fellow students from their communities to apply to university, and even more of these scholarship recipients were involved in helping other students apply to the same scholarship program that enabled them to access the opportunity that they had. We should not underestimate the softer impact on the student of receiving a scholarship. And we found in the literature that we looked at and when we spoke to different people, this is often overlooked. Because it's overlooked does not mean it does not exist. In fact, we would argue that this motivational aspect of receiving a scholarship goes a long way towards convincing these students that they should volunteer, that they should be giving back, that they should be helping others. So we asked directly in our survey, what is the outcome of receiving a scholarship? And more than half reported an increase in confidence, more than half reported an increased motivation to do well. And most of them reported having a better focus on studies in the absence of financial pressure. I'm not going to read all the quotes out, they're all in the report. And finally, perhaps because of this increased confidence and this increased personal growth, we found that scholarship recipients seemed ready and raring to go and really take on leadership responsibilities and leadership positions. So we found that almost half of the scholars we spoke with not only were involved in extracurricular activities and taking on leadership of student clubs and societies, almost 25%, about a quarter, wanted to take on the leadership mantle once they left college. They wanted to take on leadership roles. They wanted to do everything from building the next best thing in the world of technology that transforms the world, their words, or to build, to be a leading agent of change and to pioneer transformation in everything from public policy, cancer research, landscape architecture, fashion photography. They wanted to be change makers. And this is something that was supported across the sample in all the countries we looked at by scholars who may have received very little money or loans to scholars who had received a full ride. So we find that these 5 tenets of the impact on the student exist no matter what the type of the scholarship program or the duration and the length of it. Now, the impact does not stop at the student level. Let's talk about the impact on the community. The first major impact that we recorded and observed on the community is that students want to give back. Almost 2/3 of scholars reported a greater desire to give back to the community directly as a result of the scholarships. So we weren't asking questions that were just open-ended, how are you feeling today? Etc. We wanted to be able to trace and track changes in motivation, in volunteering to the scholarship program. 2/3 of all reported a greater desire to give back, and most of them were putting their actions where their mouths were. So most of them, while studying, were volunteering. And many of the alumni as well, after they left university, after they completed their education programs, would continue to volunteer as a direct result of receiving the scholarship. And secondly, they want to choose impactful careers. I mentioned this a little bit a couple of minutes ago, but let's discuss this in a bit more detail over here. So scholars' social mindedness has also spilled over into their career objectives. And this we were able to test looking both at current scholars but also at the careers that alumni had chosen. And we found that many of them, up to 1/3, were either in education or considering a career in education or the nonprofit sector. And about 1/3 were also considering a career in government. Now these scholars are potential change makers on the regional and even national levels. Careers in education, in the social sector, in government can really lead to system change. And these scholars were savvy about that. They recognized what choosing these career choices meant for their futures, for their communities' futures, and for their country's futures. So, for example, one of the scholars in our sample was providing specialized health services for impoverished children. Another had set up a teacher training enterprise to bring education innovation into the mainstream, and I cannot even begin to share the long list of aspirations and dreams that so many of these scholars shared. We had gone in to basically try and understand what the impact of scholarships is, and the entire research team at the end of this project actually came away with a lot more. We came away feeling inspired by the young people that we had met, spoken to, interviewed, and surveyed. Let's not forget the impact on the country. Very often when it comes to talking about or trying to measure the impact of scholarship programs, it often comes down to a numbers game of how many students are going to university, how many of them are graduating from university. And very often the lens is not sort of taken back at a macro level with, well, what are these students then contributing to the country? Let's not forget that any student who goes through higher education, goes to university, is becoming a member of an expanding human talent pool, which is the big driver for human capital development. And we have lots of evidence in economics, both theoretical as well as practical, that shows us what the impact of human capital development is. We know that studies have found that a 1-year increase in average education could raise the level of output per capita by between 3 and 6%. So these are not figures to scoff at or to underestimate. What we feel is important is to link these figures to the role that scholarships play in putting those bodies in university that can then contribute to this kind of growth. There's another interesting phenomenon in Asia. I don't know how many of you know this, but Asian government investment in education is lower as a proportion of GDP per capita than in North America and Europe. Did most of you know that? How many of you knew that already? Or rather, how many of you are surprised by that? No, right, okay. What is interesting though is that at the same time, the demand for higher education in Asia is so great that despite this limited investment and frankly limited infrastructure of higher education, enrollment has been growing very, very rapidly. And what that has led to is increasing tuition costs. There's not enough government subsidization going into the sector. At the same time, there's a lot of demand. Simple mismatch, tuition costs go up. Scholarships can help offset this rise in tuition costs that we are seeing, as the magnitude of which is a very unique Asian phenomenon. And scholarships, therefore, can really help put higher education within the reach of Asian students. And finally, mitigating income inequality. The aggregated outcome of need-based scholarship programs makes it possible for low-income students to attend university. And let me give you a 1% figure, which is not the traditional 1% figure that we hear these days. So UNESCO finds that 20% of university graduate-aged persons from the wealthiest households complete at least 4 years of university, whereas less than 1% of the lowest income households do. Scholarships help us lift this 1% figure. Now, the other really important part of our study, as Ruth mentioned earlier, is the toolkit. What was our aim with the toolkit? When we were observing these different scholarship programs, when we were researching and interviewing and talking to other programs that we did not look at in this much detail, and when we were doing a very comprehensive global review of what other programs in the world are like, we noticed that there is room for a practical sort of how-to which will help scholarship programs better adapt to the unmet needs of scholars themselves. And not only unmet needs, but which will also allow scholarship programs to leverage this pool of young, highly motivated, intelligent, smart, willing to give back youth that they are helping train. So we wanted our toolkit to help scholarship programs increase their effectiveness. And like I said, the idea was not to pour a lot more resources into it. The idea was to find the little connections that can be made, the little changes that can be made to improve existing scholarship programs, or things to watch out for if you have not yet started a scholarship program. So the first one that we have is clear goals and strategy really maximize the scholarship's impact. And let me explain what we mean over here. So when a scholarship program has clearly specified goals, it not only makes resource use more efficient, because with clear goals it's easier to actually select the applicants that can fulfill those goals. It also makes the applicants more likely to realize those goals. And what do I mean by that? Let me illustrate that with an example that Dr. Goodman had mentioned earlier. The Ford Foundation International Fellowship Program, which ran for about 13 years, it funded about 3,000 scholars from the developing world and basically sent them to the US for higher education. The goal of the program was to send emerging leaders from lower income countries for higher education. So applicants were selected on a demonstrable track record of community leadership, not grades. For example, volunteer workers from Mindanao in the Philippines were selected, LGBT activists from Indonesia were selected, women's rights activists in India were selected. So people who had demonstrated that they were invested and were working towards improving their communities. And they found, in fact, IIE is conducting a 10-year longitudinal impact study of this program. The results of some of the preliminary results have been published, which found that despite no return obligation, so a lot of scholarship programs that send students abroad have a mandatory return obligation that you must return to your home country. Ford Foundation implemented and imposed no such return obligation. But despite the lack of a return obligation, almost every single recipient not only returned to their home country, they went right back into community leadership, and they doubled down on that and in fact amplified and improved the impact of what they were doing already. The scholarship funder understood what the main goal is. They selected applicants based on that. The applicants understood it and went back and basically carried out the agenda that had got them into the program in the first place. So that's just one example of how setting clear goals helps with an efficient strategy. Also, active communication creates greater connectivity with scholars and alumni, and it's not rocket science, right? We know that communication is great, it's important. What we have though are numbers to support the demand for this kind of communication. We found across the 3 programs we surveyed that 86% of all scholars and alumni wanted even great connectivity with the funder. Why would this be important for the funder? Well, one, scholars can be great ambassadors for the scholarship program. In fact, almost a third of the recipients in the 3 programs that we covered had learned about the scholarship from a scholarship alum. So there's an inbuilt ambassadorship, really, in maintaining better and greater communication with existing scholars. We also found that this one really doesn't involve an investment. A lot of scholars are using social media. They express a preference for social media. It's free, it's easy to use, it's ubiquitous. The Philippines, scholars in the Philippines love communicating through Facebook. In fact, the Virtuous Foundation, to help us collect the data that we needed, set up a Facebook group for scholars, and that is the channel through which we were actually able to reach the minimum sample that we needed. China is using QQ and WeChat, and India is using also a number of social media channels. So again, young people are already engaged with social media. This is something that scholarship programs can leverage quite easily, painlessly, and at virtually no cost. Now, communication is the pathway to what really becomes deeper engagement with the scholars. effective engagement with scholars and alumni, we found, actually really facilitates giving back. And that giving back extends not only to the communities that these scholars belong to, but to the donor, the funder themselves. So the first thing we noticed is that regular communications actually make scholars feel engaged. They feel like the funder is invested in them and in their success. And it's low stakes again. Getting an email here and there from the donor really doesn't cost that much extra effort. Some of the quotes we had around this is, and we had many around this, contact with the funder is the best motivation in uplifting spirits and achieving higher grades, said one of the scholars. Another one said, merely responding to that email gives me a sense of accomplishment. Not a very high bar, but she was doing very well otherwise as well. And of course, where possible, in-person events are even more influential. But we understand that that's not always possible. So at least the minimum threshold of communicating, emailing regularly with scholars really gives great dividends. We also found that this kind of engagement would help capitalize on really a hidden repository of goodwill that scholarship recipients and alumni feel towards the donor. So we had people telling us that scholars may one day be in a position to help increase the funder's reach in society. We had others tell us they helped us in a time of need, and when they do need us to do something for them, we will definitely do what is possible. And they were again converting these words into action. Where they had the opportunity, they were volunteering at CSR initiatives at the company that funded their scholarship programs. Where they had the opportunity, they were mentoring new entrants into the program. Where they had the opportunity, they were recruiting more underprivileged students to apply for this scholarship. So there is a lot that recipients and alumni can do. They are ready, they are willing, they really want to. They feel a deep sense of gratitude and of belonging and of wanting to make a difference. And scholarship programs can really capitalize on that. And finally, we found that enhancing the employability of scholars is greatly desired, and it's again within the reach of most programs. So when we looked at scholars' needs, what are the needs where the largest gap between what they want and what they are getting is? And that's really these scholars, these young people recognizing that they need more than just a university education to prepare them for the workplace. They want mentoring from professionals. They want internship opportunities. They want the chance to interact with people in different fields. They want to observe and see what a real-life workplace looks like. And often this desire can be met, again, with relatively low stakes by the scholarship donors. So for example, in one program that we looked at, scholars expressed a deep desire for guidance and mentoring by professionals. Meanwhile, the company that was sponsoring the program wanted to leverage this pool of scholars as future employees, as a pipeline of future employees. But what wasn't happening was that these two needs, which actually connect very well, were not being met. All it took was a matching system that would allow company employees to mentor these scholars and at the same time give these scholars access to internship opportunities and guidance counseling and career counseling. Another example here, and this is where I want to mention the Heinrich Foundation's Global Trade Leader Development Program, is this scholarship is profiled in our report as one that kind of checks a lot of the boxes for all the points that we had in our toolkit. They invest a good deal of effort in matching scholars to employment and the right educational program that supports this connection. They also do a really good job with setting clear goals and engaging with the scholars, and I encourage you to read the profile in our report to learn more. So we're talking about scholarships, and I think we all understand what we mean by scholarships. But when we started researching this, we realized that there is a big range of terms and expressions that are used to essentially define the same thing. So we've added a typology in our report that will help you, if you come across any kind of scholarship program, really figure out which of the building blocks it is composed of. So sometimes scholarships are called grants, sometimes they're called financial aid, other times they're called awards, sometimes they're called rewards. this kind of typology will help you identify exactly where a scholarship program falls. And we've defined this around 6 lines, and I'll leave you to explore that yourself in the report. So I just want to end by reminding you that, remember, each scholarship has the capacity to enhance 26 lives on average. The scholar herself, her family, the students that the scholar is mentoring, the students that she's leading through clubs and societies, and the community members that she's volunteering for. And this kind of impact is generated at the individual level, at the community level, and the country level. So not only are scholarships, despite being a traditional tool, a highly impactful and effective one, they basically generate dividends for a lifetime. The figure that we came up with is only for the duration of a scholar's university degree. We did not even attempt to try and quantify what the impact is once the scholar leaves the university and through their career, through community engagement, sets off even bigger ripples in the ocean around them. So thank you very much, and I encourage you all to please read our report. We have a Q&A, please. Anyone has any questions? Good, that was crystal clear. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Chilang Tam. I'm an executive search consultant as well as a management and strategy consultant. If I can just perhaps say on behalf of the audience, you have some gems, that you have some really good things. Because I have been involved I've worked with IIE on scholarship programs, so I have some exposure to it. I was the chair and I work on that as well. What you have there actually very useful enhancement steps that people know about, but not acted on very often. Because and the main reason for that is by the time they finish running the scholarship program, they're exhausted. And then you have some people like me and other volunteers who come around and say, why don't you make use of our alumni? Why don't you have more gatherings? Why don't you have drinks together? And say, God, we just want to go home and go back to our kids. So they don't act on it. So I was just thinking that I'm going to make an accusation, and I hope you will tell me to shut up. Okay? My accusation would be that chances are you may not do anything more after this session about what you've done. And that is a shame of it, because I think what you have to say is powerful and valuable. And so often research is done for the sake of research, findings, and then they stop there. Whereas the power of the findings is if you put them in a place in people's minds and make calls for actions, and then they do something about it, and that's where the value is created. That's where the entire wisdom growth is created. So if I can, then perhaps challenge you, since you have good stuff to share with the world, is that you need to act on it. You need to have workshops. You need to put this on YouTube. Okay, you need to be everywhere IIE is. After they finish talking, you should be there and say a few more things. I think that those are the actions I would like to suggest, recommend for you.
Thank you. That's both a compliment and a lot more work for us. I see what you did there. I can say with utter confidence, the YouTube box we've checked. We have recorded everything. It is going up on YouTube. I will also say that at CAPS, as a research organization, our mission is very much to not only create knowledge and create credible, robust knowledge, but really to disseminate it, get it to the right people. This launch event is some evidence of that. More evidence is that before this event, I spoke to HSBC and volunteered to help them with their scholarship program. And similarly, we are absolutely happy to talk to whoever wants to listen to us, who wants to learn about our insights. At the same time, we don't want our message to be constrained by just the people that we can physically meet. That's why our report, our study is available for free download on our website. We try to accept speaking engagements whenever and however we can, and Ruth, who has a crazy travel schedule, will attest to what that costs us, but we go ahead and do that. But more importantly, we really try to make our research as digestible as possible. We make the report easy to read, we take complex information and try to remove the complexity from that, and the how-to is exactly the reason why we have a toolkit at the end. So while we understand our responsibility in getting the word out, we would also urge all of you who are here to help spread the word. Yes, please.
Hi, thank you for sharing the insights from your research. My name is Punjabi, I work for the Youth Foundation and we work on a youth project. I was just wondering, did you come across any data on perhaps what age scholarships are particularly effective or impactful at all? And if there is a particular age, whether scholarships to schools are more effective or scholarships to universities are more effective, or anything you can tell us?
So there's very little comparative research out there that compares the different levels of education. In fact, higher education generally tends to not be discussed much in academic research and other research at all. There is more discussion of primary and secondary schooling. My understanding from everything we've looked at is that while it's not possible to say what is more impactful, they're all like, the stepping stones to a final destination, which is a life improved, livelihood improved. So primary education plays a fantastic, completely critical role. Secondary education builds upon that, and then higher education further builds upon that and kind of hones that. So impact, if an organization is considering this as an either or, it must have a very, very broad mandate, because each of these requires so much investment and effort. And with that kind of investment and effort, each of these can yield multitudes of levels of impact. So I would say there should be scholarships and support for education at all levels. There is a lot of evidence that primary and secondary schooling should be invested in. There's very little that higher education should be invested in, except at the macro level. But we found that these impacts occur at the higher education level. I can see them applying to all other levels as well.
Hi, I'm Dora Lee from HSBC. So HSBC actually supports a scholarship program in Hong Kong since 1965, a long time ago. So it's just a fair comment, not so much of a question. It will be really helpful if you can do research about the benefits to donors, for example, to government, to foundations, and to corporates. That will actually help the board in terms of accelerating the funding and sustaining the funding as well.
I mean, as long as we get funding for that research, we'll be happy with it. Is my first answer. But let me, putting that aside, the benefits for each of those kinds of donors are very clear. But I take a suggestion on, we could spell it out, because a lot of this is finding evidence and spelling out what people might think and believe, but they are not sure that they should, because the evidence is not there. Governments, investment in human capital development, and therefore a higher growth rate, which is what every government wants. Companies, CSR is one, but also really a potential pipeline of future employees. And we know that companies and organizations spend a lot of time, effort, resources, financial resources in trying to find the right person. And sorry, what was the third stakeholder? Foundations?
Individuals and foundations.
Individuals and foundations it's their way of giving back, one. Secondly, the scholarship recipients are very keen to engage with the donor and give back to the donor as well. And that's something that foundations, who are always on the lookout for more people to help, for more volunteers specifically, can really mine this pool.
Hi, it's Jeremy Woodall from University of Oxford's China office. This is fantastic. I'm going to try and limit myself to just one question. It's interesting looking in the pool of data that you've got scholarship programs that are about access and about needs-based scholarships. You've also got a few things in here like the Jardine scholarships, merit-based, and obviously those can be two very different programs. You can think of the transformative aspect of a program that gives access versus Bill Clinton becoming a Rhodes Scholar. He was not impoverished, and yet we can argue about what he achieved, but he did achieve eventually after his scholarship experience. Given your access to the data, if you were to tease out the merit versus the needs-based scholarships, what do you feel kind of innately you would be looking for in the difference in the outcomes of these scholarship programs? I mean, did you get a feel for the way that those two things split?
Yes, what actually surprised us was that in terms of the impact, there's only a couple of consequences that exist for need-based scholarships that do not exist for merit-based scholarships. Most of the consequences, most of the impacts actually exist regardless of whether the scholarship is a need-based or a merit-based one. Scholars of all stripes, across all programs, want to give back, they want to volunteer, they want to mentor, they want to be leaders, they want to work in their communities, and I don't want to get into, whether, and then we have all sorts of consequences, right? So we have potentially someone like Bill Clinton having an outsized impact on the world and not just on the country. And somebody should interview him and find out whether Rhodes had a role to play in that, because we find that just receiving the scholarship kind of turns a switch in the scholar's head, which makes them want to give back, and it motivates them even more. And that's something that we could trace directly to receiving that scholarship. The only extra benefits of a need-based scholarships, and these are not by no means inconsequential, are that lower income students are able to get the opportunities that will otherwise be denied to them, so that the next lower income student could also become a Bill Clinton. That's what a need-based scholarship does over a merit-based program. I think last question, and then we have to go. Yes.
You pointed out that 26 people or thereabouts are touched by a scholar. Probably you didn't capture in there is the fact that I think what Dr. Goodman was referring to is that when you build those bridges and you bring someone from a disadvantage or who has grown up in a very different country or economic environment, and you implant them on places where other people are. Other people learn about how other ways of life are, and perhaps if all of us get that exposure, I'm sure that number 26 will be much larger. We need to build those bridges. I mean, sure, I understand that perhaps all scholarships are good, but I would come down on the need to build bridges, because if it wasn't for the international mix, we would have wars between different countries. If we didn't have a mixing of social classes and economic classes, we would have, remember the society that Time Machine ended up with, different classes of society who don't understand each other.
Absolutely, and I think actually, this is not an either or. Some scholarship programs are able to very well meet a different group of needs and achieve different goals at the same time. So absolutely, there should be many different kinds of scholarship programs, and we hope to continue to see the trend increasing and not tapering off.
I want to just make a couple of comments and then thank you. CAPS does have a small advisory services, and we try to use the materials that we come up with in our research to help donors and philanthropists, corporate and individuals do their work better. And one story that I want to share with you, which is about helping to connect the dots, is we worked with a company that does support a number of scholarships. And the scholars felt like they wanted not only more connectivity, but they needed mentoring and life skills. And completely separately, because we were working on CSR, we polled all the employees. And 90% of the employees said, we wish there were more volunteer activities. There's not enough. So it seems so obvious, except that they hadn't done it. And all we had to do was create a platform for the employees of that company to volunteer to mentor the scholarship recipients, those that receive scholarships from that company. It's a win-win-win, and now they're doing it. So I think, some of this is fairly straightforward. It just maybe the light bulb didn't go off, and with this kind of study and with this kind of discussion, it can. The other thing I just want to say is that because I do talk to a lot of wealthy people, a lot of them do not articulate exactly why they give scholarships. If you say, why are you doing this? They'll say, well, it's a good thing. Education's a good thing. And so the ones that are in this room, HSBC and the Enric Foundation, they are the ones who are really thinking through, and Jardine, what is our goal here? And that is something that is up here, and you think that's rather obvious, but not everybody does that. And when you articulate the goal, and a lot of that is around reaching those that had not been reached before, then you do that. So we really want to encourage thoughtful philanthropy and thoughtful investment, and scholarships is one way to do that, but really thoughtful programs that can have extraordinary impact. So having said that, I really want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank Mevesh. Did a great job, didn't she? And of course, we're here in Hong Kong, so if you have questions or comments, don't hesitate to let us know. And thank you.